And welcome to us, brought to you by Rhodes Perry Consulting. I'm your host, Rhodes Perry. So I think most of us who've listened to the show for a while know that workplace demographics are rapidly changing. Demographers predict that somewhere between 2045 and 2050, depending on the research that you look at, the United States will become a majority minority nation. And this reality impacts all aspects of our lives, including the workplace and the face of leadership. Now, many executive teams that I work with recognize this shift. They want to build inclusive workplace cultures that really reflect these shifting demographics. Yet many feel overwhelmed because they're not sure where they can begin. They're juggling those competing priorities. They want to transform their workplace culture and everything that touches it to prepare for the future of work. And they also want to develop the next generation of leaders that reflect these demographic shifts. Now, in our belonging membership community, we recognize that the next generation of leaders really expect so much more from their workplaces and their career velocity. And they also hold high expectations for their employees. And status quo companies that refuse to transform their workplace culture consistently fail to meet them. They also recognize that to be prepared for the future of work, the face of leadership and the way that we lead, it also has to change. And I'm so grateful that today's featured thought leader, Dorothy Enrique, founder of the Ellevate Collective, offers some tangible solutions for leaders who recognize the opportunity that this moment presents. So Dorothy is a third generation culture kid, by the way, of Belize, Italy, Japan, and the United States, and has survived 15 years, being a corporate America executive veteran, and the author of Be Accountable and Be Fabulous. Dorothy helps leaders maximize their influence across all levels of the organization, no matter what seat they sit in. So together, our conversation is going to support DEIB professionals, along with other executives and those on their way to joining us, to really look at the specific trends that relate to the changing face of leadership, strategies to overcome anti-Black bias that hinders the career velocity of Black professionals, and how to hold ourselves and other leaders accountable. So Dorothy, thank you for being patient with that intro. I'm really grateful that you're here. Thanks for
Thank
making the
you
time.
for having me. It was an awesome intro.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. And I just want to congratulate you on your book. Writing a book is no easy feat, right?
Tell me
And
about it.
yeah. And I love the title. So be accountable and be fabulous. And that's right. Yeah, that's where I would really love to start with you is
Sure.
on the topic of accountability, you're charging us, like to be accountable. And
Right.
and I'd love for you just to kind of share with our audience, like, what does accountability look like in the context of leaders who really want to lead with their stated values? At least that's what they say. So
Right.
what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that in today's landscape, accountability really kicks off with that personal accountability. Did I do what I said I would do? Did I communicate if and when I realized that I could not do it? So we have to say what we're going to do as leaders. We have to do what we're going to say. And then we have to communicate when we cannot do it. Right. And so in the book, I refer to that as this idea of TRICOM. That is, a variation of what Alan Fine talks about with his say do co method. And so it begins with that personal accountability. If I can't even adhere to what I said, how can I expect others to do what I told them to do? And I think, many moons ago, it was sufficient to say, well, you'll do it because I said so. You'll do it because I'm paying you. But in this landscape, that is not as compelling as it once was maybe 40, 50 years ago. And so in today's leadership landscape, part of the journey as leaders is to model the way, and it begins with that personal accountability, because if I'm modeling right behavior, then I am setting a prime example for people to ignite those expectations and not build resentment along the way.
Yes, that's a really great answer. And I think on that piece, the accountability, and I like the think, do, or the say, do, and then communicate, right?
Yeah.
Um, when we're in that autopilot mode, where, and I'm thinking, you've been in corporate America for 15 years, the
Yeah.
pace. It's a fast pace, it's a
Sure.
stressful pace. So when we are kind of the stress hormones are firing in our bodies, we're kind of like more recoiled.
Yep.
What are some of those practices, if you're coaching leaders around, hey, when you notice this happening in your body, or like what are some of I mean, that's usually where I go, is just kind of like find the wisdom in your body. And I know not everybody is, a lot of us are just operating from the neck up. And
Yeah.
so that's harder to do.
Yeah.
How do you help leaders get out of that stress response cycle to actually model and to show, especially when they're being challenged?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is that we, especially in corporate America, it might be a little different in government, might be a little different in nonprofit and some of the other sectors. But to your point, in corporate America, the pace can often be unrelenting because the focus is generating revenue. And so we're like, you got to make money, you got to make money. Did we make money? Did we hit our targets? And so, what it does, I believe, is it creates an environment where we can't take the time to tune in, whatever that looks like, however we want to frame it. But we're not as self aware because everything is happening out here. And we're trying to manage everything that's happening out here. And so, we can't pay attention to where our pain points are, if you will. Right. And so, some people call it tuning in, some people call it chakras, whatever you call it, tuning into your body and breathing into you. Now here's the thing. I'm not going to should all over anybody. It's not something that you should do. If you feel like it's just extra work for you to look at how you're feeling and how you're doing, don't do it, because this is all about mindset and this is about being present. But where are you being blocked? Do you feel like when you think about the next thing that you're about to do, that your throat is tight, right? Do you feel like you can't speak for yourself, like you can't ignite your thoughts? Because that's something that, as you think about the thing that you're working through, maybe you're not sharing your truth, if you will. And so you can't lead if you're not heard. But if we can't tune in here and it takes 30 seconds, right? And they have, I think the Headspace app literally has 1 minute meditations.
Yeah.
Take 1 minute because you have to breathe anyway,
Right.
right? And so is it tight in your throat? Is it tight when you think about this thing that you're working on, or this project, or this colleague? Do you have like a pain in your chest, right? Is it something with your heart? Is it something that you're feeling in your gut? Tune into and feel into you. Brendan Burchard always talks about feel the day, but we're running at such a fast pace that we almost feel like I don't have time to feel the day and I don't have time to feel myself. But fundamentally, leader, you are the talent and you have to take care of the talent. You are Beyonce. So you have to take care of the talent, because if you don't, who will?
Right.
And so we have to take, even if it's just 30 seconds, what's getting in my way?
Right.
And what preposition am I going to use to navigate what's in my way? Am I going to go around it, through it, over it, under it? What am I going to do? Which preposition is going to work for me in this moment regarding this task, this project, this person, this season?
Right. So I have two other questions on this, because it's so rich in what you've shared. And I think the first is, recognizing that leaders are influencing at all levels of the organization. And I mean, this well, in more corporate environments at the executive level, I would imagine most of those C-suite folks have a coach of some sort, right?
Yep.
For the folks that are in leadership roles, and maybe those that, they were really great at what they did and they got promoted to that first level of management. And now that all eyes are on them. They have to
Yeah.
show, they have to do what they say, they have to kind of communicate out what they did,
Right.
what they didn't do, right?
Yeah.
And they may not yet have that support, right? And they may not meditate. And I'm an
Yeah.
avid meditator. I know not everybody loves it, right? Like
Yeah.
for those folks, and I know that's a harder kind of layer of an organization to look at, yet I feel like that layer really sets the tone of culture. Do you have ideas, or are there things that you do in your own practice to really provide support, knowing that it's more kind of a do-it-yourself approach until
Yeah.
investments are made at that level.
Absolutely. And so if I'm understanding correctly, it's what do we do when we're in the middle,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yep.
most organizations throw dollars at the highest levels. We're talking VPs and C-suites. And when the investment is made, it's often also made in the top 100. When they're looking at succession planning, that's where a lot of the dollars get allocated. And so as it trickles down, that number obviously decreases. And so with many organizations, they're investing about $1,500 a year per person. And it really depends on your role. It depends on where you are strategically within the organization. There's some varying mitigating factors, and some departments will get more than others. So for the individual who feels like, gosh, I would like a coach. I need a coach, but when I was looking at the price point, it's currently not in the budget, or I'll do it later, or I'll see if I can get my company to pay, whatever the case may be. And so for that individual who this is something that's on your list of things to do, but you cannot do it yet.
Right.
Not that you can't do it at all, it's that you can't do it yet. Here's what I want to lift up for your consideration. In the interim, while you're waiting, right? It's this whole idea of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But in the mid season, what you can do is a few things. Number one, especially if you're new to the middle, number one is understand that there's going to be a leadership transition. And so my hope for you is that you have cultivated and curated relationships in your organization so that you have grace to make the mistakes that are inherent in transition. And just know, download it, that it's not going to happen quickly. Typically, when we're transitioning from one role to the next, it's about an 18-month transition. Some companies are aware of this, most are not. And so when your performance takes a nosedive, you think something's wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. You're in transition, you're learning, you're growing and developing. This is why you need relationship currency so that you can make those withdrawals, because it's going to happen. And so I just want to lay that out for context. But while you're waiting for a coach, a couple things I want you to do is commit over the next 180 days to cultivating, curating, and building your army. Who's in your army? There's 3 key people in your army. And these are all people who are going to have your best interest at heart for FREE, free.
Yeah.
Person number one, and well, individual number one, but you want to try to have a few because you need an army. So individual number one is going to be a mentor. And this person, so for my people of color, no, not a mentor. You're going to get an advocate, you're going to get a champion, you're going to get a sponsor. Everyone else, mentor, right? So you want to get a mentor, and they don't have to be light years ahead of you. This can be an individual that's about 2 steps, 3 steps ahead of you, right? Think about Kobe and Jordan. If you follow basketball, Jordan has 1 extra ring than Kobe. 1. May he rest in peace. 1 extra ring. It's not that he had 10 rings, 1. And so that was his mentor, right? So find someone who is a step or 2 or 3 ahead of you. And this is an individual inside the organization or inside the industry that you can bounce things off of, and what you're encountering in your role when it comes to projects, when it comes to building relationships and engaging in what managers have to do around relationship repair. But this is someone who's a few steps ahead of you, who will have insight that you don't have yet. Try to get 1 or 2. And even for my people of color, still get a mentor. Just don't do the formal mentoring programs, because that's not for you. It's not going to benefit you. It's going to benefit the person who is mentoring you more than it's going to benefit you directly, unless you're working in an organization that understands the dynamic of what it means to be BIPOC and implement and ignite mentoring programs that actually work. So take that, put it to one side. Get a mentor or 2 or 3. The next person you're going to get an ally. Try to have a few. Don't just have one person in each of these categories, have several. Your goal is to amass an army. Now, for those of you who work in a tiny, teeny company, it's not going to be an army. It's going to be a handful of folks, but you can still amass an army outside of that organization, right? So the second person that you're going to start to develop and cultivate relationship with is your allies. So a couple of things to note about allies. Number one, this is someone with influence. People listen to this individual. They've got influence, but not just influence alone. They also have the likability factor. People like them. There's people with influence, we know them, and no one likes them, but they have influence, and often it is in positional authority, right? Like, because I said so, those individuals, that's not going to be your ally unless you have to, right? But you want to pick someone who is influential in the organization and they have the likability factor and they are in rooms that you're not in yet. Because part of this journey, leader, is making sure that your personal brand within your organization and outside of it is solid. So you need to know what people are saying about you.
Yes.
And the only way you can find that out is with your allies because they're in rooms that you're not in yet. But here's the major key. I want you to pick allies who will say your name. It's not enough for your ally, right? If Rhodes is my ally, and so he's telling me what everyone is saying about me, but he is never saying my name, he's not a full ally, right? I hope this is tracking. I hope this is making sense. So I have to pick someone with the influence, the likability, and has my best interest at heart and is going to tell me what's being said about me, but it's also going to say my name and not solely just bring intel back to me as I continue to curate my personal brand. So you want to have a few allies, but other major key alert, it cannot be your boss. It cannot be your boss. It cannot be your boss. Your
Again,
boss's job is to manage performance. So even if they are your biggest champion, this is not going to work if it's your boss, because that will be laced with bias. Okay. So allies, ideally for those of you who work in large organizations, they should be outside of your department, not stay in your department. This is not how we accrue relational currency, right? So start talking. I know you didn't come here to make friends. I know you came here to CTC, cut the check, but you're going to have to make friends and you're going to have to talk to people so that you can find your allies. And then the last set of individuals that you need in your army are your cheerleaders. These individuals may not have a ton of influence. They may not have a ton of power. They may not have a ton of authority, but they love you. They like you. And they are there when you make mistakes, not if. They're there that when you make mistakes, they're going to say, hey, Rhodes, remember when you put that project together and no one else could do it? Hey, remember when they said that we'd never be able to fix this and you fixed it? Remember that? Remember that? And so, right, you're in a puddle. You're like, oh my God, but my performance review, they're going to walk me out and make me pack a box. But your cheerleaders are there to remind you of your greatness. Because the other thing I want you to hold, leader, honestly, we forget who we are all the time. Most of us forget every day. And we need to be reminded of who we are. This is how we continue to cultivate confidence, because your confidence gets rattled every time you climb a step. It just rattles. And so you need your cheerleaders to cheer you up. You need your cheerleaders to say, go do it. You need your cheerleaders to say, you better apply for that promotion. You better, or else we're going to take you to the parking lot at 3 p.m. and beat you with a wet noodle. Like, you better apply. So these are the people that you need in your army. That was a really, really long answer.
That was like masterclass though, right? Because I think that that's resistance, and we started this conversation around accountability, right? And it's just having that support of knowing when, a learning edge shows up, you're in autopilot because of that pace that you're in, the stress that you're under. And I love just the distinction of sponsor, mentor, ally, and then just kind of having those cheerleaders. And So I think the other point of resistance that I had out of that, the initial response that you had on accountability is the challenge of not having enough margin in our day just to like even do our work, right? Like I work with a lot of leaders where I'm like, let me take a look at your calendar. And it's like meeting, 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 meeting. And then work happens when technically it's after hours, right? So, I think like I could just imagine, we're in an audience and folks are like, I really love what you're saying, Dorothy, and I have no time to make friends. How, and I know that it's like it's a matter of prioritizing. How
Sure.
do you respond to that kind of objection? Or
Yeah,
do you see that? Yeah.
I feel like I not only see it, I feel it, and many of us find ourselves roped into meeting culture.
Yes. Yeah.
And so many of us are in organizations where we have the meeting, then we have the meeting to meet about the meeting, but then we have the meeting again because somebody wasn't at the last two meetings. And then we're
Yes.
going to have a meeting again to just recalibrate about the first meeting and the second meeting and the third meeting just to make sure so that we meet again. Listen, so
Right.
here's what I recommend because I have lived that life. Number one, what happens is in a lot of these meetings, half of them, especially when you're in a meeting culture where we're meeting for meeting's sake,
Mm.
a lot of times there's a lot of chitter chat that happens in these meetings. That's part of why we're having meetings for the meetings for the meetings. Half of these meetings, I hate to say it, they're not productive and they're not a good use of your time. So since you're there anyway,
Yep.
that's your opportunity to make friends because you're
Mm.
already there.
Mhm.
And a lot of these meetings start late
Yes.
and then the rest of them go over. So
Mhm.
because the meetings are starting late, because people are chitter chatting, oh my God. So like about the other meeting, did you talk to Scott? Did you check in with Flora? Did you see the new floral arrangement for the new Galentine's Day event that we're doing? So because this is all happening anyway, that is your chance. So here's what I want you to do. Because you know you're about to be in 20 billion meetings that you don't need to be in anyway, depending on where you sit in the organization, one question I want you to ask is, what do you need me here for? What is your vision for what you want me to do and how you want me to help? Because there may be times that people will say, I don't know. We'll circle back. And so we'll let you know and we'll send a recap email, right? And this is a soft way of holding people accountable without saying no agenda, no attenda.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
we can say like, well, what is your vision for me here? What do you want me to do? How do you see me gifting my leadership skills during this meeting? Whatever the case may be, because they may say, you know what, now that we've thought about it, you don't need to be here. We'll send you a recap. But in the event that they say, we don't care, we don't know why we need you, but you better stay,
Mm.
I want you to have a strategy in mind. I want you to make a list of at least 10 people who are often in these billion meetings with you.
Mhm.
And when the chitter chat time is happening, you are taking a few minutes out of your schedule in this chitter chat to build relationship and rapport. And if it's virtual, do it in direct message.
Mhm.
If you've got their phone number, text them. If you've got IM, you can text them while you're in the Zoom or the Teams and you could be IMing them off to the side. And if it's in person, sit next to them and just say, you know what? I saw that project that you were working on. That was really amazing. I know we're going to not start for another 5 minutes. Can you tell me like what was a key learning from that project? And you can start to build and cultivate relationship in the midst of this culture of not having any time to even breathe, let alone go to the bathroom.
Yes. That's also, I mean, just thank you. It's also such a great way of reminding people it's already built into your day. You don't have to make extra, right? Like you don't need other meetings to make the friends. So thank you for that reminder.
Yes.
Thank you. Um, so in the opening, we were kind of you were talking about accountability and mentorship programs that aren't always the best for BIPOC folks, maybe for other people holding a marginalized identity, queer folks, people with disabilities, things like that, right? And in your practice specifically, you're amplifying the leadership of Black professionals. And it seems like from what I looked at your website, like with Black women in particular, right? And
Yes.
so can you talk to us about why this work is really critical to overcome those stubbornly persistent anti-Black biases that exist in even in leadership theories, when we're talking
Yeah.
about leadership development. So
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of the motivation of why you started, your particular business and how you see it actually, delivering the results that you imagined when you first had that idea, that business idea?
Yeah, I think when I started Ellevate, the intention wasn't for all the key experts to be Black. It just worked out that way. But the focus was on women and seeing more women in top leadership roles, because there's that body of work that says it literally makes dollars and cents to
Mhm.
have women in the highest levels of the organization, i.e., the C-suite. And so there is this body of research that talks about how companies will literally make more money. People will literally have better wellness. People will literally have lower cases of sexual harassment. People will be more engaged. People will be more confident. The climate improves tremendously when the C-suite is more half and half. And so when we look at the nation across the board, it's literally women are over 50% of the population, but we are not over 50% of the C-suite. And the trend that we saw initially was token woman. We've got one, even if there's 8 of us or 10 of us, we are being diverse because we've got one woman. And so people caught on to that. And I'd say in the last decade, it switched from a token to a toucan. And
Yeah.
now we've got 2 women. And so
Yes.
we did our part and we've taken care of it and stopped talking to us about how we're not being inclusive, right? And so ideally, there are organizations that are committed to making sure that it is half and half, but we still have quite a long way to go. And the last time I looked at that research, I mean, women in the C-suite, it's about 27%, which is not even close to half. So I think from the lens of having a firm where all the experts are Black and then having a firm that is literally completely woman owned, and as I think about navigating a landscape that doesn't necessarily always consider how women ascend into power, how they wield and maintain and share leadership, let alone adding the element of being Black. And so, not just in corporate, but in the nonprofit landscape as well, we see anti Blackness. And I will say that it is subtle, yet not subtle at the same time. But again, this speaks to this idea of intersectionality. We use the term DEI here at Ellevate. We use DEIE. I mean, I promise it's an alphabet soup. I remember when it was just a D. So
Yeah.
here we use diversity, equity, inclusion, and engagement because engagement is the wrapper. And
Yeah.
so it sits inside of engagement. If engagement scores are low, you're probably not doing a good job with DEI. But ultimately, DEI is the broadest sweeping stroke you could make. It's the biggest paintbrush that you could find. And so, what intersectionality does for us as practitioners now is it allows us to drill down so that we can be specific with what we're talking about. And so, as I think about anti Blackness, like I remember when no one was having this conversation. And I believe without 2020, and without George Floyd, we still wouldn't be having specifics in intersectionality around anti-Blackness, because this speaks to those underlying prejudices, those underlying attitudes, these beliefs, these discriminatory actions that are directed at people because it's like, I can't hide my complexion. I'm not even passing. I heard blondes have more fun, but I'm still not passing for any other race. And so when I think about the elements of anti-Blackness, especially in corporate. And when I look at Black leaders, male and female, there are some dynamics that are always at play that others are unaware of. When I think about tone, right? And if I'm passionate, it is construed as she's aggressive. If I show up in a particular way, then it's not considered professional. If I wear my hair the way it grows out of my head, I need a law pass to say that it's okay for me to wear my hair the way it grows out of my head. And as a result, because I'm wearing my hair the way it grows out of my head, then I don't have executive presence. And if I'm a woman or if I'm a man, but I'm Black, these other individuals don't want to have to hear what I have to say and report to me because I am the deciding factor. I think that there's so many things that are at play. And what this fundamentally does is it lowers our ability to flourish and it increases our feeling that we must cover. And so what is covering? Well, number one, in this landscape of diversity, equity, inclusion, I believe it's one of the philosophies that is completely inclusive from the lens of other elements that exclude the white male, in particular, the middle-aged white male, because we all cover. I don't care what race, I don't care what age, I don't care your background, I don't care what country. We all cover at one point in time or another. We might be part of the LGBTQAI plus community, and I'm sure there's more alphabet letters that are going to be added, but we may try to come across at work as more straight, right? And more hetero, because we're covering, because we're trying to see what's the impact when we come up in this culture. If we're Black, we might code switch, but everybody code switches, not just Black people. If everybody's Christian, but we're Muslim or Hindi, we might try to cover in that sense. Like, we need to take a day off to celebrate this holiday because, this holiday is coming up, but I don't want to tell everybody because everybody's Christian and they're talking about Lent or Easter or Resurrection Sunday, but I'm the only one. And so I'm going to cover and say that I'm sick. I'm going to just cover and take a vacation day and not be able to share this authentic part of me. So I think that ultimately, anti-Blackness is very present. It's not always getting talked about, but when someone is being put in the precarious position of covering, especially because you cannot hide your complexion. Now, there are some people who could pass, but for the rest of us, I'm Black. You can see me coming from a mile away. You know that I'm Black. But ultimately, if I'm covering, I can do good work. I can do great work. But the prospect of doing phenomenal work has plummeted to just about zero because I am now carrying a 500-pound backpack everywhere I go. And I'm second guessing my face, this makeup, the nails, the hair, the voice, the tone, the attire, everything is being added into this backpack in me trying to belong. And instead, the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and I am now over-indexing in pleasing. This does not allow me to cultivate my leadership practice in an impactful way. And it certainly doesn't allow me to achieve the highest level of happiness, which is meaning, because I'm so distracted by what I need to do in order to survive in this culture. I can't thrive. And if I'm the leader and I can't thrive, this is going to impact your success, because fundamentally, I think the mistake that we make in our society is that we think that racism is a BIPOC thing. Everybody else. It's an everybody thing. It's just important. It's just as important because this impacts white people too. If you've got a bunch of people, first of all, the dynamics are about to switch anyway if they haven't already, right? The US is going to be completely flipped. It's not going to be predominantly white. So if you've got predominantly diverse teams and you have a homogenous mindset, you are literally setting yourself up for failure. And so part of this journey is awareness, but I think the rest of the journey is a platform to have candid, open dialogue and conversation without there being tears that are going to stop the conversation from happening. And so I think that the fact that we can even talk about anti-Blackness and the role that it plays and what efforting and discretionary effort is taking place for something that you literally cannot control is a start. But I do believe we have a very long way to go. That was really long.
That was incredible. And so much of your approach really resonates in kind of how I talk about this work. And I really appreciate you going through just the aspects of covering and how, it allows all of us to kind of identify what is lost when we cover the things that are most precious to us, whether people look at us and assume who we are, right? But when we feel like we're withholding things that could, we're adding part of our lived experience to the workplace, which can help us maybe approach a problem in a different way. I mean, the fact that you've lived in many different countries, like you have experience of just, like in Japan, here's how I've seen people do it in Italy, in Belize, right? And when we don't feel safe enough, and I know you do a lot around psychological safety too.
Yes.
That just, it sucks out like any chance of being innovative or having the grace, like when you were talking about earlier, to make mistakes, like we have to be able to make mistakes before we have that big breakthrough, right? And we're not going to
Exactly.
be dynamic if we can't have that room for any of us to make a mistake, and that our
Right.
mistake doesn't define who we are, right? Or our ability or effectiveness in our job. And
Right.
unfortunately, and I know that you see this in your work, there's a disparity and like where the grace is being extended and where it's not. And
Yeah.
anti-Black bias does not help, right? It just
No.
adds an extra layer of like, I have to be perfect. I have to
Mhm.
please everyone. I have to fit in. And that's a recipe for just complete burnout. And,
Oh,
yeah. So
1000%.
yeah. So I have like two more questions for you, and then I'd love for us to go into our private Q&A.
Yeah.
And so future of leadership development programs, right? Like many that we see across, like, I guess, leadership development programs designed maybe over the past 10 years or older
Hmm.
are not able or capable, in my opinion, to really develop the future generation of leaders and what they need in this super dynamic workplace and world that is every second it's changing, right? And
Right.
so, from your perspective, skills and mindsets, I know we kind of talked about this in the beginning. What kind of skills and mindsets are crucial for those next generation of leaders? And what are ways that we can start to develop that in different ways, outside of these kind of stale leadership development programs that I think you and I can probably have another
Right.
conversation about.
Right. And I think part of why a lot of programs are stale is because a lot of them are rote.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is organizations, unless they have the most gigantic leadership department ever, which most of them don't, it is going to be rote. So it's here are our modules, here's what we're going to talk about. And there's just not a ton of flexibility to expand and contract based on who's in the class. But beyond that, often in corporate, the class, whatever it is half a day, maybe 2 days, 5 days if you're lucky.
mm,
And so it is all back to back to back. And we already know adults can't retain all that. If you are lucky, you probably get about 15%, maybe 20. And so it's this back to back experience because if you've got the captive audience, you have to maximize while you've got the captive audience. And because it is rote, it doesn't take into account some of the skills that we need in this current landscape. And it doesn't always take into account that many of these leaders are advanced. This is not their first rodeo, but they're curated and cultivated as if these individuals are new to the block and they just don't have any line of sight and experience that could bolster how this program unfolds. So that's part of why it's an issue. The other side of that is that many organizations recognize that. And so they find leadership programs elsewhere, send their people, and tell them to bring it back. Awesome until it's not. So what ends up happening is you go to this incredible leadership program with McKinsey or Wharton or whoever or Cornell, wherever you go, you bring it back, and it is the lack of foresight to say, we didn't consider that these are the best practices in the world and that our culture is not designed to withstand the shift. And so, Dorothy, we're so glad you had such a great time. We love that for you. We're not doing that because that won't work here. So I think part of the solution is having those cohort style experiences that are internal where you bring in the people who eat, breathe, and sleep leadership all day long so that it can expand and contract because a day or two, you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. And then sometimes it's too long, sometimes it's not long enough. And so instead of taxing the 3 leadership development professionals that you have, saying, you know what, you work on the things that it makes sense for it to be a little bit more rote. And then you bring in these other people where it's this cohort style experience that speaks to agility, advanced leadership practices, innovation, and the things that we call soft skills that I think that term is trash. It is hard skills because you can't succeed, you can't excel, and you can't get promoted without them. So how soft are they? They're not really That's soft. And so as I think about the current landscape, part of what we want to see in leaders is their ability to vision cast to their teams and to create that centripetal acceleration, right? Where the communication makes sense, the tether makes sense, the thing that is attached to it makes sense, and you have the agility as a leader to bring it in, cast it out, and get people on the same page, because we all are working in such fast-paced environments that if your leadership is not congruent, it's not coherent, and it's not consistent, you are going to run into problems, not just in the downline, but across and up as well, which fundamentally on the corporate side, it's going to impact revenue. But on the nonprofit side, this is going to impact our mission and our vision and the community partners and the people in the community that we serve. So ultimately, this rests on understanding that we live in a landscape right now where there is a war for talent. There's the great resignation. You've got multiple generations in an environment and everybody's running lean. Are you kidding me? This is the most complex landscape that I think we've ever had to navigate. And so as leaders, I just want you all to hold that leadership is not something that you arrive to. You are literally practicing leadership. You practice your leadership every day. You cultivate your leadership practice every day. And so, what kind of environment and climate and culture are you creating with how you show up? And how agile are you? Because if you don't have learning agility, if you don't have focus agility, if you don't have people agility, this is the agility age. If you aren't agile, you are putting yourself, your team, and your goals at risk. But you have a task to do in assessing how agile am I, where are my areas of opportunity, and how agile are my direct reports? How agile are we laterally? And understanding that you might have to be the one who spearheads this charge, because without the agility, the goals will suffer.
And I love so much of what you just shared there. I think like retiring that phrase soft skills and letting that go and recognizing, like you
Seriously.
said, it is, yeah, I mean, at least in my lifetime, the most complicated kind of scenario that we're in right now. And
Right.
when we think about the workplace and the world, so definitely a new face, a new style of leadership is absolutely needed. And I think so much of what you've shared today gives us really accessible ways to begin doing some of that work, no matter where we sit, and really in alignment with the book that you wrote. So last question for you, and then we'll jump into private Q&A for the rest of the hour. The show is about imagining, right? So I'd love for you to take a moment. We were talking about like maybe breathing a little bit and to, imagine this future of work, right? And specifically the future of leadership. And I know you have a big vision. We've kind of caught glimpses of it. Like, what is that vision for you when you think about, 2050? We've been talking about like that as a target. What does the world look like, and how are we leading, and what's different than where we are now?
I would say I would imagine a space where people can come to work and flourish, not just survive, and not just like, okay, I can do anything for a year. I can do anything for 2 years. And having this mindset of, I just got to get through it, and not taking that like grit, teeth grinding approach. But I envision through discretionary effort and really just transforming the way that we look at the world of work, because we spend so much time there. I imagine a place where you can gift your leadership to that organization and we see the engagement scores shift. 70% of people hate their job. They hate it. Hate, hate. But what if we could see that number flip over the next 25 years, and it's 70% of people who live in the US love their job, because they get to spend at least 80% of their time operating in their strengths. And instead of sitting with their bosses, hearing about here's where you suck, here's where else you suck, and here's where else you are sucky, we can, instead of focusing on all the things that we just aren't even good at anyway, we can adopt a new lens where the work can be shared and it can almost be more collectivistic versus individualistic. And what I mean by that is the idea of, yes, I have this job description, but if I am not good at Excel and that's part of my job and you are, why can't you do it? The client fundamentally doesn't care. Did Rhodes do the Excel spreadsheet? Well, then Dorothy's not that good. What? It doesn't matter. Did it get done? Did it get done excellently? Did we execute with brilliance? Did we over deliver? And so I just imagine a world where it is so much more collaborative. And instead of trying to just avoid bad cultures and bad bosses, we're clamoring for these amazing, enriching experiences. Because if we're going to be gifting our leadership and spending time away from our friends, passports, and traveling and family, how can we experience a space where we can find that highest level of happiness, which is meaning, in the work that we do every day? If we're going to leave the house and get out of bed, especially when it's cold, let's want to do it.
That is a North Star I'm willing to join you and in traveling towards, right? Like that's beautiful. And this conversation has been a delight, Dorothy. I really appreciate you and the time that you've offered. So so we're wrapping things up now. For folks that are watching through the live stream, if you want to connect with amazing thought leaders like Dorothy, check out the Belonging membership community. That's where we're going right now. We've got a few people that are ready to ask Dorothy some really good questions. So that's where we're going to go. And for everyone who's tuning in, thank you. And thanks for growing the Belonging movement. We appreciate you. All right. Okay. So Kristen, I see you and I see someone joining on a cell phone. Oh, Kristen just left. So she got she's like, I have no questions. All right. I'm not sure who's joining 917. I used to live in New York, so love the zip code. Maybe you're still there, maybe you just kept the number. But if you have questions for Dorothy, this is the time, and I'm gonna check the chat to see what's going on there.
Awesome.
Right. And maybe someone's getting coffee. So Dorothy, this is great. I have the link that you shared. We're going to share that in the show notes. And
Okay.
let's see, let me make sure the live stream stopped. Hey, Ellie, do you know if the live stream stopped?